So a while back, I don't know exactly when this happened, but Mike Pence showcased exactly why he is unfit to hold public office. This video that I'm going to show you just showcases the magnitude of his ignorance when it comes to scientific issues, and you have to really question if somebody with this this sort of judgment, somebody who can look at the evidence for evolution and still say these sorts of things, is just completely deluded, and facts don't matter to him. Evidence does not matter to him. And nothing showcases that more than what I'm about to show you. So let's watch.
Mr. Speaker, I've always been interested in origins. Even though my training is in the law and in history, it has ever been an avocation of mine to contemplate and to study the origins of man and of life here on Earth. And many theories of origins have been propounded throughout our nation's history. 1859, a sincere biologist returned from the Galapagos Islands and wrote a book entitled The Origins of Species, in which...
The book was called The Origin of Species, and in it Darwin proposed his idea of evolution via natural selection. And to say that there are multiple or many theories that explain the origin of mankind is absolutely false. First of all, evolution only explains the diversity of life. It does not explain the origin of life. For that, we have abiogenesis, a completely separate theory with entirely separate lines of evidence than what we have for evolution. If we had no evidence for abiogenesis whatsoever, we would still have all of the evidence for evolution, which is mountains upon mountains. And also, there's nothing that comes even close to meeting the requirements of a scientific theory, the absolute rigor that is applied to a scientific theory, than evolution. No religious explanations meet that mark. Nothing like intelligent design meets that mark. And this is something that he just completely does not understand. He doesn't understand what a scientific theory is, and he showcases that.
He did then, Charles Darwin, offered a theory of the origin of species, which we've come to know as evolution. Charles Darwin never thought of evolution as anything other than a theory. He hoped that...
Right. But the thing is, you are using a false equivocation of the word theory. You're using the common definition that it's more of like a proposed explanation that still needs to be tested. In science, we refer to that as a hypothesis, not a theory. A theory is a compilation of many tested hypotheses that have been confirmed, and it also combines these tested and confirmed hypotheses with general laws and observation and facts about the natural world that we see, and those are all compiled into an overarching explanation that explains why these facts happen, why these things are true, and it makes predictions about what we will find if the theory is true. That's what separates a theory necessarily from a scientific theory from a layman's theory. It's not tested. A layman's theory is not tested. You may have theories about why your back hurts, but until you go to a doctor and they do tests and experiments, you can't know if that's true or not. So yeah, I could think that one day Brahma farted and everything came into existence, or that we're floating through space on a turtle, or some god masturbated and jizzed out life and the universe. But those are not objectively testable. They don't make predictions on things that we would find. They're not supported by evidence or experimentation. They don't come anything close to being a scientific theory. And Mike Pence just doesn't understand this.
Someday it would be proven by the fossil record, but did not live to see that. No.
Except he kind of did. Only 2 years after he actually even published his book, we found this lovely little specimen called the Archaeopteryx, which is a dinosaur with feathers. And now, of course, we know that dinosaurs were the ancestors of all modern-day birds. It's just that birds have their forearm bones and fingers fused, unlike dinosaurs, which is really actually something that Darwin predicted that we would see in the fossil record. The paucity of evidence in the fossil record was really only due to the fact that we first of all didn't really know where to look, and paleontology hadn't necessarily completely taken off as a science. We have discovered so many fossils since Darwin's day. It's actually embarrassing how many fossils that we have. If Darwin were alive today, he would be absolutely in awe of the fossil evidence that we have, and I'll show you some more of that in a second.
Nor have we. 1925.
That's completely false. Not only did Darwin see Archaeopteryx in his lifetime shortly after he published The Origin of Species, since then we've developed complete lines of fossil evidence for many different, even types of animals. For instance, horses are one of the most documented fossil records we have. We pretty much know the exact evolution of modern horses, and that's really only through the fossil record. There are no extant species that were ancestral to modern horses that we can look at or anything like that. There's a little bit more of a diagram or a picture here. Let's see if it will actually load. This didn't work. No, we have skulls. You see the toe bones were fused into hooves over time. This is a well documented evolutionary chain. You have the evolution from lobe-finned fishes to amphibians who are actually able to walk on land, all the way from Eusthenopteron through Tiktaalik and then Ichthyostega. So Tiktaalik was we actually predicted, Neil Shubin and his team actually predicted where we would find Tiktaalik. It wasn't like he was digging in his backyard and he found it. He knew where Devonian era rocks were, and he decided to go dig there, and lo and behold, what they found was this little guy, Tiktaalik rosier, who is shows all of the indications of being a fish-like, amphibian-like ancestor, but had bones in its fins and even shoulder bones that it would be able to push itself up with and kind of shamble along the ground. This is an incredible transitional form that kind of shows us the history of our ancestors coming out of the water onto land and becoming land-dwelling animals. That's for later.
In the famous Scopes monkey trial, this theory made its way through litigation into the classrooms of America, and we all have seen the consequence over the last 77 years. Evolution not taught as a sincere theory of biologists, but rather, Mr. Speaker, taught as fact.
Yeah, because if you actually understood how science works, you might realize why that is. In science, theories actually hold more weight than individual facts. It might be a fact that, my book falls to the ground when I drop it. It might be a fact that my cup tips over when I push it. It might be a fact that the tides happen and that the moon goes around the earth and that the earth goes around the sun. We might not know why these things are actually related, right? If you look at them and you have absolutely no knowledge of science whatsoever, would you actually think that those things are interrelated? Not necessarily. Why should they be? But through science, we understand with the theory of gravity why this happens. The theory of relativity, which is of general relativity, which is the best explanation of gravity we have right now, says that these are actually dense or compressions in space-time that make objects rotate around each other and make objects fall to the ground. And so all these facts that are disparate, that don't seem like they necessarily go together or would even be dependent upon each other, are all explained by our theory of gravity. So our theory of gravity has more explanatory power than individual facts. It's stronger than the individual facts that we have. That's a scientific theory, Mike Pence. That's a scientific theory, and that's why we treat it as fact. You're not going to talk about gravity as if it's not a fact. You're not going to talk about sexual reproduction as if it's not a fact and does not happen, even though sexual reproduction is a theory. That would be like saying, in his same general argument, that the stork theory of reproduction is just as valid as biological sexual reproduction. It's not.
And lest anyone listening in would doubt that, we can all see in our mind's eye that grade room classroom we all grew up in with the linear depiction of evolution just above the chalkboard. There's the little monkey crawling on the grass. There's the Neanderthal with his knuckles dragging, and then there's Mel Gibson standing in all of his glory. It is what we have been taught, that man proceeded and
I sort of agree with him here because, evolution is not a linear process. There are many different branching patterns that end in extinction, and that total linear progression that you see from ape to, or complete ape to man, is not really probably how it happened. Neanderthals weren't our ancestors, they were our cousins. Many of the fossils that we have that document hominid evolution probably were our cousins and not necessarily direct ancestors. So this linear progression would be better represented as a tree, first of all. But even then, yes, we know that this happened. We have the transitional forms and fossils for hominid evolution. We understand that brain capacity grew and jaws came back, and we can sort of have a rudimentary tracing back to what our common ancestor with chimpanzees probably looked like. It's well documented in the fossil record. Just because evolution is taught as a fact and we have some slightly misleading examples of it in the classroom doesn't make it false. I mean, we have the models of atoms that we use in the classroom, the models of the bacterial flagellum. That's not what they actually look like, but they're simplified models to explain a concept. That linear progression from ape to human probably isn't the best way to explain evolution, because that's not really how it actually happens. And it also kind of implies that somehow evolution was meant to end up in humans. There's no necessary reason why evolution should have ended up producing humans, even though it did. So yes, it is slightly misleading, but just because our teaching tools are oversimplified does not mean the point that it's trying to teach or get across is false.
Evolved along linear lines. But now comes a new find by paleontologists in the newspapers all across America. A new study in Nature magazine. 6 to 7 million year old skull has been unearthed, the Torme skull, and it suggests that human evolution was actually, according to a new theory, human evolution was taking place, and I'm quoting now, all across Africa and on the earth, and the earth was once truly, and I quote, a planet of the apes, on which nature was experimenting with many human-like creatures. Paleontologists are...
Right, but that's what evolution does. It experiments with a lot of different body types and tries to figure out which one... And I shouldn't even talk about it in that way because it's not like a planned process. But that's how evolution works, you moron. It's not linear. Go pick up a biology textbook and just read for 10 minutes about evolution, and you might understand it maybe a little bit more than you do right now. That's not how it works. It's not linear. It's branching. It's like a bush more than even a tree. But it's useless to try to explain this to you.
Excited about this, Mr. Speaker, but no one's pointing out that the textbooks, I guess, will need to be changed, because the old theory of evolution taught for 77 years in the classrooms of America as fact is suddenly replaced by a new theory, or I hasten to add, I'm sure we'll be told, a new fact.
It's not being replaced by a new theory. Okay, the theory of evolution is the explanation of the diversity of life. The individual facts may or may not change, but they will always confirm the theory of evolution. If we came across a fact that seemed to disconfirm evolution, then that would need to be looked at very seriously and tested and seen if it doesn't fit. Because if it doesn't fit the theory, then the theory will have to change. But as we discover new facts, our understanding of how evolution happens will change. Even though serious evolutionists and evolutionary biologists and paleontologists never thought that evolution was this linear process, it was more of this branching nonlinear pattern. Even though no serious scientists ever thought that, it might be being come across to Mike Pence as them saying that the only theory of evolution that we have, the only theory of evolution that was ever taught was this linear process. We're not replacing the theory of evolution. We are updating facts that still support the theory of evolution. It just gives us a broader, better understanding of how it happens and how it happened.
Well, the truth is, it always was a theory, Mr. Speaker. And now that we've recognized evolution as a theory, I would simply and humbly ask, can we teach it as such? And can we also consider teaching other theories of the origin of species, like the theory?
Not in the science classroom, because there is only one scientific theory for the diversity of life. There are no other scientific theories that explain it. There are none. There are none. If you go to the second definition that you're talking about, these just wild conjectures, then yes, there's plenty, but they're not evidentiary. They aren't proven by evidence. They aren't borne out in the fossil record. They aren't borne out through genetics. They aren't borne out through the geographical distribution of species like evolution is. They are not scientific theories, therefore they do not belong in the scientific classroom.
That was believed in by every signer of the Declaration of Independence. Every signer of the Declaration of Independence believed that men and women were created and were endowed by that same Creator with certain unalienable rights. The Bible tells us that God created man in His own image, male and female, He created them. And I believe that, Mr. Speaker.
Do you now? You literally believe that 6,000 years ago, some God just poofed everything that there is into existence, even though every fact and every measurement that we take points to a universe that is superbly old, and every bit of fossils, every bit of genetics that we do confirms evolutionary phylogenetic trees that were already in place. You don't understand evidence. You don't understand how to think rationally. You mentioned that the founders believed in creationism. The founders signed the Declaration of Independence 100 years before Darwin even came up with his theory. It was not quite 100 years before he published The Origin of Species. They didn't have the scientific knowledge. Many of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were deists who didn't believe in a personal God. And I guarantee you that if they lived in the time of Darwin, if they had ever seen the evidence that was presented by Darwin in his very thorough book, they would have been convinced. They would have believed it, because the evidence was so compelling for what Darwin was saying that overnight, really, well, not quite overnight, but very quickly, people began to realize that there was a lot of merit to what Darwin was saying. The founders were rational thinkers, unlike yourself, and they would have been convinced by Darwin's reasoning, arguments, and the evidence. So they were only creationists out of pure ignorance. That's it. And even the deist position is basically, well, we don't have an explanation, another viable explanation for why life exists, why life is diverse, why anything is here. They didn't have these explanations, right? That's like saying that because the founding fathers didn't believe in vaccinations, or wouldn't have been able to believe in vaccinations because they haven't been invented yet, then you shouldn't vaccinate your kids. It's a completely fallacious and moronic argument.
I believe that God created the known universe, the earth and everything in it, including man. And I also believe that someday scientists will come to see that only the theory of intelligent design provides even a remotely rational explanation for the known universe. But until that...
Oh, the theory of intelligent design, which is not a theory, it's a hypothesis that has not been tested because no serious scientist will waste their time on it. The intelligent design is really pushed by this place called the Discovery Institute, headed by a lawyer who's not a scientist, by the name of Philip E. Johnson. And he had this to say about intelligent design. Quote, I also don't think that there is really a theory of intelligent design at the present time to propose as a comparative alternative to the Darwinian theory, which is, whatever errors it might contain, a fully worked out scheme. There is no intelligent design theory that's comparable. Working out a positive theory is the job of the scientific people that we have affiliated with the movement. Some of them are quite convinced that it is doable, but that's for them to prove. No product is ready for competition in the educational world. This is the guy who founded the Discovery Institute and is one of the biggest proponents of intelligent design, and even he admits that there is no working theory. There's nothing even comparable to Darwinian theory. There's nothing, literally. And this is coming from the man who came up with the Discovery Institute. I mean, you have the Templeton Foundation, which offers grants, very, very generous grants to people who are willing to look at the spiritual or religious side of science. Intelligent design proponents have not submitted a single paper to the Templeton Foundation for grant approval. What does that say? If they were confident in their theory, don't you think that they would be taking advantage of these very generous grants that are hard to come by? Yeah. Or the fact that in this case, the Kitzmiller v. Dover, intelligent design was put on trial. You can, do your own research as to the details of the case. But basically, a conservative judge who was appointed by Bush, right? Who was good was he appointed by Bush? Yes, he was appointed by Bush, but he was also friends, I think, with Rick Santorum, or at least recommended and thought highly of by Rick Santorum, basically said that intelligent design is not science. And if even he can see that, a conservative who really at the beginning of the trial even said that he had doubts about evolution, if he could see that intelligent design was not a legitimate science, then I don't know how else I can convince you that it's not a legitimate explanation.
Day comes, and I have no fear of science. I believe that the more we study the science, the more the truths of faith will become apparent.
You have no fear of science, really. You might not fear science, but I think you hate it because we have stories like this where you literally didn't think that smoking caused cancer, despite all of the evidence that was given by the medical community. Or this, where you don't believe in evolution, which I'm showing right now, and you don't believe in climate change either. Climate change, which is one of the most agreed upon facts in science today.
Would humbly ask, as new theories of evolution find their ways into the newspapers and into the textbooks, let us demand.
These are not new theories of evolution. The theory of evolution is the theory of evolution. The facts that we have to support it change, or we discover new facts that continue to support it. The only time that would be a problem is if we discovered a fact that was not congruent with the theory of evolution. In that case, we'd have to take a serious look at those facts and decide whether the theory of evolution needs to be changed, amended, or abandoned. But every time we find a fact, new information comes out, what happens? It always supports the theory of evolution, which is why it's been around for 150 years, which is why it's the only valid explanation for the diversity of life that we have.
That educators around America teach evolution not as fact, but as theory, and an interesting theory to boot. But let's also bring into the minds of all of our children all of the theories about the unknowable that some bright day in the future, through science and perhaps through faith, we will find the truth of from whence we come. And I yield back.
The problem with that, though, is I have a suspicion that Mr. Pence only wants particular theories that he accepts or believes in to be taught in classrooms. So what if I decided to teach the Hindi theory of the origin of life, or, the origin story that I talked about earlier, where a god literally ejaculated life into existence or the universe into existence. If you really want all theories in the sense that he was talking about, where it's just a conjecture that has not been proven, if you really want those things taught into a classroom, then you have to bring all of the theories into the classroom, which doesn't just include the Judeo-Christian idea of a six-day creation. It includes Hindi. It includes, this is sort of a joke, but Pastafarianism. It includes the Greek gods. It includes every supernatural explanation that there's ever been, which is why these should not be allowed in a science classroom, because they are not scientific theories. They are just made-up conjectures that you might believe in, but you don't have evidence to support them. You don't have scientific evidence to support them. You don't have experimentation to support them. And if we're not going to teach science in the science classroom, then what's the point? What's the point of having a science class in the first place? I have no problem with you teaching those, explanations or theories, quote unquote, in a religious studies class. But then again, you'd have to incorporate all viewpoints. It gets sticky and messy, and so this man doesn't understand science. He doesn't understand what theories are. He obviously doesn't understand the separation of church and state, and it's hard to believe that somebody who struggles with accepting facts and evidence as much as him should ever be thought to be qualified to be in any public office, never mind the second most powerful man in the country. And it's incredibly disturbing. Obviously, he's slightly better than Trump, but it doesn't surprise me that some maniac retard like this got picked.